A very good evening, and you're very welcome along to another edition of the Green Zone Conversations with Eugene Doyle. On this evening's episode, although revered in Israel to this day, Sergeant Mike Flanagan is almost unknown in his native land, and yet the County Mayo native's story of courage, commitment, and loyalty is a narrative to equal any in the archives of military history. But now, all these years later, thanks to the research and dedication of a retired army officer, the life story of the Foxford County Mayo-born Mike Flanagan has been meticulously documented and published by way of a new book, Sergeant Flanagan, Foxford and Israel. My co-host, Marco Alexander, is live from Jerusalem, and myself will explore this fascinating story with retired army officer Donal Buckley, who is also from Mike Flanagan's native Foxford, and who is the author of this fascinating book. We're also joined by Malcolm Gaffson, who is chairman of the Israel-Ireland Friendship League. Malcolm is Dublin-born and immigrated to Israel in 1980. He's married to Israel-born Leah, and they have 4 children and 15 grandchildren, which should certainly keep him busy. Now, Malcolm is a media and communications graduate, and previous postings include the Jerusalem Post, where he was TA Bureau Manager. Malcolm was also El Al's in-flight English media channels manager. He served in the IDF as a communication liaison officer with the reserves. He's a member of the Likud Central Committee, and if all that wasn't enough, Malcolm is vice president of the Israel Council of Binational Friendship Associations. And a very good evening to all of you, and very welcome to the Green Zone Conversations with Eugene Doyle.
Thank you.
Erev Tov, Shalom from Israel.
Okay, and I forgot to say that Malcolm is joining us live from Israel as well. Now,
very alive.
Let me start off. I just want to give viewers a sense. Sorry, just before we do that, I just want a bit of housekeeping. Viewers there, if you drop a comment in the chat, we'd be grateful. We'll read it out. We'll answer it if we can. But this is interactive, so we want people who are listening also to comment on anything that they hear, even if they're just saying hello or whatever it is. Just comment and in the comment box there. Okay, you can also subscribe. So you'll see these coming up every now and again on the drop a comment in the chat. You'll see that to remind people that they can do that throughout the podcast or the webinar. Now, we also like people to subscribe to the channel for more insights. Subscribing to the channel drives up the numbers of people watching, and it's a favor I ask of you to please subscribe to it. You can also like and share it, and that's also another request I would have of you, if you can do that as well. So they're the ones I'd ask you to, and I'll give you reminders of them throughout the program. Now, to get started, I'm going to start with you, Donal, because you are central to this conversation tonight. Donal, first of all, tell me about your military background, your what corps you were in, where you were, had you served overseas, anything like that. Just give us a sense of who Donal Buckley, the former army officer, is.
Thanks very much. Just a very quick summation for a reasonably short career, about 22 years. I joined in 75 and I left in 97, basically. And during that time, most of the time I was on the border with Northern Ireland during the terrorist years. And I also served overseas twice in UNIFIL in South Lebanon and once in Western Sahara. Always had an interest in things Israel and Israeli, especially after my first tour in Lebanon. And it sort of went from there. I moved to County Mayo when I left the army, living about 20 minutes from Foxford, where I discovered that Mike Flanagan came from. And that's about it, really.
And Donal, in the army, what corps were you in?
I was an infantry officer.
Infantry
27th Battalion, 29th Battalion, etc., etc.
Okay.
I won't bore you with the details.
Good years in the army?
Excellent. I enjoyed myself thoroughly. Yeah, great, lovely time, most of the time.
Okay, now, just give us the story of how you came across Sergeant Mike Flanagan. How did you come across it to begin with?
Well, there was an article in the Western People. It's a Mayo-based newspaper, and it gave a small synopsis of a story, and my ears pricked up and my eyes opened. I said, goodness me, who is this, and why is there nothing? Why do I know nothing about him? And I started to dig, and it was an amazing story. There wasn't too much information about him. It was difficult to access information, but a bit of rooting and a bit of digging got me to enough to give the basic story in a book. I'm sure there's an awful lot more to be discovered, but meanwhile, I've put out there what I could find out about him. That he was born in Foxford in 1926. When the threat to invasion from Germany to Britain and to Ireland had passed, he came of age, and he decided that the right thing to do was to bring his fight to Hitler. Didn't join the Irish army because the threat of invasion had gone, and he decided he would do what he could do. And he joined the British Army. He landed on D-Day in Normandy. And the following year, in April of 1945, he found himself with the 11th Armoured Division and involved in the liberation of Bergen-Belsen. And what he saw there obviously really scarred him deeply. He saw 60,000 prisoners half dead and 13,000 rotting corpses lying around. And this seared in his mind the dreadful things that the Nazis had done to the Jewish people.
Okay. Now, everyone could see there the cover of the book that you wrote, and that just for people who may wish to purchase it, I've put a link in the description below as well. It's Buckley's Bookshop, isn't that correct, Donal?
BuckleyHistoryBooks.com.
BuckleyHistoryBooks.com, and that's the link is in the description below. Now, tell us who Mike Flanagan was, and how he ended up first of all in the British Army. How did that all come about?
Well, Mike was born in Foxford in County Mayo, about 20 minutes from where I'm now living, and he decided when he came of age, it was after the threat of invasion had passed, to the threat of invasion by the Nazis to Ireland and to Britain. So he decided that the right thing for him to do would be join the British Army and go and bring his personal fight to Hitler, which he did. He enlisted in the Hussars. He landed on D-Day on 6th of June 1944. And the following year, he found himself in Bergen-Belsen with the 11th Armoured Division, that's the division that liberated Bergen-Belsen. And what he saw there absolutely scarred him for life and gave him an extraordinary and traumatic introduction to the Jewish people and the Jewish way of life, and what happened to the Jewish people, what the Nazis had done.
Okay, now what happened after after seeing the concentration camp?
Well, he continued. He stayed in the army, and after the war, he found himself in the then Palestine, just as the British mandate was coming to an end, and they were evacuating and pulling out their stores, their ships, their equipment. And you can imagine the amount of kit and equipment that had to be removed after 31 years of occupation, from artillery, armored vehicles, trucks, jeeps, stores, bedding, down to cutlery, knives, forks and spoons and everything. Not everything could be sorted, and so the brief was to get rid of as much of the unnecessary stuff and put on board ship the necessary stuff. And non-essential items they were told, just no questions, get rid of it. If you can sell it quietly, no questions will be asked, just get rid of it. Stuff like jerry cans and cutlery and that type of thing. And the one proviso was that they would not sell anything to the Haganah, and they would not sell anything to Arab terrorists. But we don't mind what you do, just get rid of it.
Okay. I'm going to turn to Marco.
Many of the equipment fell into the hands of the irregular Arab armies.
Correct. Yeah.
Marco, can I just turn to you for a moment? Because can you just outline for the viewers what the situation around coming to the end of the British mandate? What was was it chaotic? What was the scene like, the political scene there like at that time?
Yes, there was already a civil war in course, basically up to the withdrawal of the British in May of 1948 to all intents and purposes, there was already a civil war between the Arab and the Jewish population. It was pretty chaotic. There was a lot of terrorism on the Arab side. The British were basically at that stage turning a blind eye to most of what the Arabs were up to, and they were coming down pretty heavily on the Jews. The history of the British involvement during the period of the Mandate is a mixed one. It starts off very well, but then after a few years, sentiments change, a perception of interests change, and by all accounts, there was a pretty large element of anti-Semitic sentiment which was present in the many of the British officers who served during the Mandate period. Basically the Labour, what was to subsequently become the Labour Party, urged a policy of restraint towards the British administration. That, however, changed, especially with the activities of the Etzel, who had probably at that stage had a greater understanding of the situation, and they were more aware of the fact that the British were reneging on their commitments. The penny would subsequently drop for the let's say the official Zionist movement, the one under the leadership of Ben-Gurion. So basically, there was awareness and a sense of urgency that the Jews needed to prepare very quickly. There was an arms embargo, and there was a pressing need to get arms into the country, whereas the British basically supplied the surrounding Arab countries. And Egypt basically was supported by the British. The General Staff of Jordan was British, and the British in what became Jordan, it was Transjordan at the time, were basically reporting to the Foreign Office. So what the nascent Israeli state not only fought the Arab states, the surrounding Arab states, and the local Arabs within what was to become Israel, they were also to a great extent fighting the British. And the British, it has to be said, were helping the Jordanians. They were fully aware of the massacre in Kfar Etzion. So this is a chapter of history which hasn't been fully explored. So the nascent Israeli state was basically fighting against the surrounding Arab states, who were availing themselves of the know-how of the British as well.
Now,
and indeed, there were Air Force engagements between the
go ahead, Malcolm. Yeah, go ahead, Malcolm.
Can I just make a comment there, just to add on to what Marco was saying just now? Menachem Begin, of course, he was the leader of the Etzel, or the Irgun, as the British called them. Then you also had the Stern Gang as well, whose leader they murdered. They shot him in the back a year or two earlier there. But unlike, if we just draw a little parallels, and I know Mike Flanagan from his family was always quoting from when Ireland got its independence, became an Irish Free State. There were those who went pro-treaty, anti-treaty. We got the Civil War in Ireland. But in Israel, that's the one thing they could not afford. And I say all dues to Menachem Begin, even with Ben-Gurion putting out all sorts of orders to destroy any arms they bring in. They did bring in a ship called the Altalena, which they brought a ship full of arms from Europe. And Ben-Gurion said, no, they're not to have any. If they're going to take some, we have to go and blow them. They blew the whole ship up, of course, at the time. But Menachem Begin said at the time, we will not have a war amongst brothers. We will not have a civil war. That will be the end of us. And actually, there was no civil war. He even allowed your gun guys to get absorbed into the IDF, which became Haganah, became the IDF, Itzal, and there was a civil war averted. That was very important, because if there was a civil war, that would have broken us and absolutely destroyed our ability to defend ourselves against all these irregular armies. As Mark quite rightly said, the best trained army in the whole Middle East was the Arab Legion under
Pasha Glub,
British.
Pasha Glub,
Yeah. And ironically, by the way, Mike Flanagan, this commandeered tank of his, the first major action was in the Latrun area. And he actually was driving that tank, and he drove it all around the country from north to south, to east to west. And the Arab side thought there's loads of tanks on the Israel side. There's only the one tank. This one tank driven by Mike Flanagan, and even kept by Mike Flanagan because he was a mechanic, you see, so he used to keep the engines going. But his first assault on that was against Latrun, and because, as Marco said earlier on, they were the best equipped, best trained. Actually, the forces could not overturn Latrun. In fact, they had to retreat.
Not until 1960. In fact, yes, that's very true. In fact, Ariel Sharon was involved in that battle, and I believe there's a picture of him being carried by Yitzhak Modai. Are you familiar with it, Malcolm?
And thank God in those days, Ariel Sharon was much slimmer than he was in the 70s. Otherwise, Yitzhak Modai could not have carried him on his back. But I'll tell you, someone else was involved. He was the leader of that. He was given the first general, how can I say, a command as the first general in the army of Israel in 2,000 years, was a guy called Mickey David Marcus.
Right.
He was in that battle. In fact, he actually knew also Mike Flanagan because he wanted to contact all those people, volunteers from abroad, English-speaking people, because his Hebrew was absolutely zilch, which actually became the death of him later on up in the mountains of Jerusalem.
Yes.
He went out when Mike came back. They asked him in Hebrew what the sma was, the password, and he started to wahoo. They shot him dead. So a lot of interconnected personalities and people involved there. Just thought I'd put that in.
Before, someone has a phone on this messages coming in. If someone could put that on silent. Someone has a phone that's not on silent there. Just for
not mine.
Can I ask Marco, just before I go back to Donal, can I ask you what is the time frame between the ending of the British mandate and the UN giving the Israel and Arabs a state?
So the partition plan is 1947, November of 1947, when the Arabs would have had basically 45% of pre-1967 Israel as well. Okay, so when people speak about being denied a state in Judea and Samaria in 1947, they were offered 45% of pre-1967 Israel as well, just to clear the air with regard to that. So Israel would have been a minuscule territory.
Now, Donal, coming back
to... That's right. It was 40-60, 60 for an Arab state and about 40% for the Jewish state.
Donal, coming back to Mike Flanagan, obviously, as you said, he was really traumatized by what he saw during World War II. He was obviously traumatized, so he came into being involved in the ending of the British mandate, involved in getting rid of all the weapons and all of those things. He obviously had a graw for the Israeli people and the Jewish people, and whatever he was going to do, it was going to be in their favor. Isn't that right?
Well, absolutely. As the two gentlemen were explaining, that there was a great sympathy and a parallel between the Irish War of Independence experience and what the Israeli Jewish people were going through at that time. And he certainly sympathized with the Jewish position, and he was absolutely horrified by the treatment of the Jewish people by the British government and by the British Army. And you alluded to this massacre in eastern Jerusalem, which Johnny Cooper, who's another Irishman, had seen. And these people were of like mind, and they say, we didn't go through all we have went through during World War II. We didn't go through Bergen-Belsen and now come here to see the army that we serve in putting pressure and treating the Israeli people like that and treating the Jewish people like that. And they decided that they would do what they could do, and they would serve no more for the British Army at the time. They'd transfer their talents and do what they could for the nascent state.
And before we get into the issue about the tank, just anyone can answer this. If you can all throw in, what was the state of arms by what was going to be Israel? What was this? What kind of military hardware had they got to defend themselves before any of this?
Can I just? Yes, I mentioned something there because actually one of my granduncles, he was actually a very great leader in the Palmach. The Palmach was the commando unit of the Haganah. And on the other side, I had feed in both camps. Another guy actually was on death row in Acre prison, waiting to be hanged. Another uncle on the other side, he was a member of the Etzel, and he was actually going to the gallows in about 3 or 4 days. His luck was that the British withdrew from their mandate in Palestine 4 days before he was about to be hung. So that saved him. But from what I could gather, and I knew him before he passed away and whatever, he said they were actually, most of their guns and those were based on what they produced themselves, had a bit of a clandestine underground, and a lot of the kibbutzim, they were manufacturing the Sten gun, which was sort of the thing the magazine was sticking out this side, used to hold it as a handmade, bit primitive, but they worked. But most of their arms they procured, and this is very ironic, were ex-German rifles that were manufactured in Czechoslovakia, and ex-German Messerschmitts that were actually produced in Czechoslovakia by the Skoda company. I'm sure you all know about the Skoda cars today.
Yes.
Well, there was a Skoda. They were manufacturing Messerschmitts and for the Germans, and a lot of them were just folded up. They were never used, and they sent out clandestine operatives from here to get those planes and get those rifles in here, which they did. They did by ship, by planes, by everything, because they actually really had nothing except these raw hand grenades, which they made themselves on these Sten guns. As Marco pointed out earlier, the British were absolutely, how can I tell you, sweeping across the country before they left here. Kibbutzim, finding slicks, as we say, under the ground, up in the roofs, in barns, even under cows. You know what? They hid these guns, and the British confiscated them from them with a blind eye to how the Arabs were arming themselves. The British always take pride by quoting the Balfour Declaration, but that Balfour Declaration was completely null and void in 1938. They introduced the MacDonald White Paper, which actually put total nearly zilch restriction on immigration, Jewish immigration, and it also reneged on the wording of that Balfour Declaration about never ending down the road giving or granting in any way independence for a new reborn birth Jewish state, Israel. So the British pride themselves that, they gave birth to Israel back with the Balfour. They didn't actually, but what came to crunch, and Mike Flanagan knew this well, they actually wanted the stillbirth of Israel and not the birth of Israel when the time came in 1948. Also part of Mike Flanagan as well. He knew he had to do something, and he sat back to back with these guys in the Haganah in a famous bar in Netanya, and they started to drink together, and they got talking together, and they kept saying to him, they never told him go and take the tanks and commandeer them, but they actually discussed with them how they were, as I mentioned just now, really down to these few stems, and they had no armor, and the Jordanian Legion were full of up-to-date British armor, loads of Cromwells, even super Cromwell. The Egyptian army, the Syrian army, they all had these tanks. Israel had none. And this really got to him. He said, there should not be another Holocaust. The Jews lost 6 million people. We're not going to make it 7. And he really, that's what got into him. And he and this guy, MacDonald, the Scots friend of his, they just commandeered those tanks out of there. You mentioned before my connection with the Jerusalem Post. There's a famous headline the day after those tanks went out, because the High Commissioner was leaving, and the mayor of Haifa invited him for afternoon tea before he left. This is a little gesture before he was going. The Brits always love their afternoon tea. So he turned around, and the headline the next morning, the British High Commissioner, Sir Alan Cunningham, said to the Mayor Hushi of Haifa, no tea, no tanks, no tanks, no tea, which actually was thanks, THANK. It was just a play on the words, you know.
Marco, have you anything to add to that?
Yes, I can add that during this period as well, the Jews were the nascent Israeli state was busy absorbing 120,000 survivors of the Holocaust, many of whom were thrown into the front line as well. So that's the kind of scenario we're dealing with.
Now,
another thing that added to the fierce defeat in Latrun was these guys got their basic training on the bus from Haifa port over to Latrun. They got out, and it was like a Tower of Babel. One guy was speaking in Czechoslovakian, the other guy was speaking in Hungarian, the other guy was shouting Poland, their clan was shouting out in Hebrew, which they still didn't understand. So it caused a lot of chaos.
Organized chaos.
Yes.
And another thing to disabuse some people, there were also Arabs fighting on the Jewish side as well, members of the Irgun as well, which many people...
Andrews.
Yeah, Andrews, of course, yes.
Especially,
and people from Abu Ghosh, the village of
Abu Ghosh, absolutely. They were very, very famous, not because of the hummus they are so famous for, but they're very famous for their loyalty during those particular times, turbulent times. I can just make mention, it was a little bit going back to Mike Flanagan. Before we went on air here tonight, you mentioned to me about the Flanigan, the connection. In fact, when I went to Shara Makim, this was his kibbutz, because he married this lady, you know well, Donal. I'm sure it's in your book. I haven't seen it yet, but I hope I will get a copy from you. And then at our next big gathering event of our Israel Ireland, I will show this to our expat Irish community here, and then we give your book a great plug.
I'll have it in the post tomorrow.
What?
I'll have it in the mail to you tomorrow.
Oh, I know you couldn't refuse.
Well, I was about to suggest that Donal come and give a presentation of the book himself.
Well, Donal, you're most welcome to come yourself with a case full of those books if you like. You know,
I'll
put on a promotional evening from you. You will not go. You'll go out even without the bag or the case you bought the books in.
Now, Donal, just give us the lead up to the events of the Sergeant Mike Flanagan and the tank. Give us a lead into that, how that all happened.
Yeah, well, Mike and his buddy Henry MacDonald used to have tea or beer or whatever, or coffee in a certain establishment in Haifa, and they were discussing their attitude towards what was happening and what they should do about it. And they had parked outside a truck full of jerry cans, which is part of the kit that they were ordered to dispose of. And an agent called Dove, D-O-V, he overheard the conversation and joined in the coffee or tea, whatever it was, and said, listen, he said, I can offload these jerry cans and stuff for you. And Mike said, well, here's the key. Best of luck to you. And that relationship sort of developed. And as Malcolm was saying, there was a dreadful need for armor. I think maybe one Sherman tank without a turret was the only hint of armor that the Haganah had. And Dove said to them, well, what can you do for us as regards getting us a tank or 4 tanks even? And he said, well, yeah, leave it with me. and they made a deal that they would liberate, if you like, four tanks. Harry MacDonald himself would drive 2 of them, and 2 Haganah operatives who were truck drivers would be taught in theory how to drive the other 2 tanks, and they'd bring 4 of them out of the depot on such an evening. When the time came to move the tanks, unfortunately, the guys who were the truck drivers who hadn't actually sat in a tank before and learned in theory didn't manage to get going, but they managed to escape safely. And Harry and Mike started up their 2 Cromwell tanks and burst down to an area where there was a low loader to greet them to carry the tanks down to Tel Aviv. Unfortunately, the low loaders weren't there, and they had to drive the tank from near Haifa down to Tel Aviv. As you will appreciate, the roads between Haifa and Tel Aviv are not like the roads they have nowadays, and how these tanks didn't break down or throw a track or suffer any malfunction, it had to be the hand of God, because that.
How far is it from Haifa to
about 100 kilometers?
100 kilometers.
Yeah.
100 kilometers, and the terrain was
pretty rough going.
Pretty rough going.
Yeah.
So they drove both the tanks down.
Yeah.
And the what do you call it? The tracks never came off them at all. Someone was looking over them. God was looking over them, or whatever was looking
Absolutely.
over them.
No mechanical hitches at all. I mean, that just doesn't happen. But both tanks just seamlessly got from A to B without a problem.
Mm-hmm. So now the Haganah they have 2 tanks, and they also have the German the Sherman tank. Now just first.
Without their main weapon. Mm-hmm.
So, now, okay, let's. Okay, so, what happened then, in the sense that, how important was this from an Israeli point of view? How important was Mike Flanagan and Harry MacDonald's their feat? How important was that, and how memorable is that for Israeli people?
It's absolutely vital.
Can I?
I mean,
momentous.
Go ahead, Malcolm.
First time we let Malcolm in. Then go ahead, Donal. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, it was absolutely vital. If you consider any battle, you've got no artillery, you've got no armor. You're naked. You're just defenseless. They needed an armored corps. They had to establish an armored corps, and they had to find the equipment to establish one. And this was the first operational, mechanically working armored fighting vehicles that they got their hands on. It was absolutely vital.
Malcolm?
Yes, as I mentioned earlier on, of course, but those Cromwell tanks were great for desert warfare. Really good. They Brits used them, and the Allies used them in North Africa, in El Alamein. They're really great for that. So it's very, very important, those tanks, to commandeer them as he did. But as I mentioned earlier on, I connect with his family, and Karine, Karine, I heard earlier from her that you were in contact with her, Karine, and we were very, very good friends, good family friends. And when I found he passed away, by the way, I had forgotten to mention on my long CV before that I'm also on the board of Machal. Machal here is the what's called Mitnat Bay Mechutzlart. It's called the overseers volunteers who came to fight in the different wars in Israel. Because I first came to Israel, not first, I came before that, but one of the main trips was I came as a volunteer here during the Yom Kippur War. And my final exams to do in the UCD, and I just left. I went to Paris. I got on the last plane out, half cargo, half seating, and I came here for 3 months during the Yom Kippur War. And when I heard he passed away, we have a long scroll wall in a place on the way up to Jerusalem, very near Latrun, with all the names of those people who fought in 48 and etc. And I never found Mike Flanagan. I went over to a friend of mine in Latrun. He's the vice chairman of the ex-tank association, whatever. He did a roll call, and lo and behold, he said, "Wait a minute here. we have the tank here. We've got this Cromwell. So that let's go and have a look for it. So we went at the back. You were in Latrun? You were in Israel, Donal?
Yes, absolutely. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So we went to the back, and lo and behold, we found that Cromwell tank. And that Cromwell tank was sort of amongst all these old big Second World War tanks that whatever. Anyway, it was hidden there. As I said, there's a little sign on it says, "This is a Cromwell tank, commandeered by the Haganah," in Hebrew, of course, and had in 1948 on the departure of the British and the end of the British mandate. And I said, "What's going on, Shaul?" I said to him, "Shaul, so what the hell's going on here?" Mike Flanagan took that boat. He commanded, "You got to get his name up there, and you got to get that tank and bring it out forward to the entrance where most of the other tanks of that era are displayed." So I sort of pushed for that. And a year later, after he passed away, we had a ceremony there. And we had the Cromwell tank all painted up, all cleaned up with a plaque and before the tank saying, "This Cromwell tank was commandeered by Michael Peled." Now, Michael Peled was actually the Hebrew name of Mike Flanagan. He took this name on, he converted, and he married, as you know, Donal, Ruth Levy from Sharei Anakim, and that's the plaque there. His family attended that ceremony. The Irish ambassador at the time came.
Others came. The Irish ambassador made a most appropriate speech at that launch.
That's right. He did speak, and I think if you look up at the time, his name was Eamon. Just trying to remember his name. He put a very, very, very nice and very equating as all we mentioned earlier on about Flanigan and the fight for Israel's independence. It was a very, very good write-up. It was in the Jerusalem Post. In fact, they covered the story. And this actually caused a lot of interest here in Israel, because as Donal quite rightly said, back in Ireland, Oxford or Mayo or even the rest of the Ireland, he wasn't known, Mike Flanagan. And I think in Kol HaKavod to you, I say, all fair dues to you, and really congrats that with this book, hopefully you will spread the name and people become acquainted with Mike Flanagan. Because here in Israel, after we had the ceremony, and there was right up in the Hebrew paper, and then Jerusalem Post, English Post, and everything, people started to become aware of Mike Flanagan. They put down in the Lawrence Arabia of Israel. They put down a heading in the main Yediot Achronot. So it got a lot of, and yet Karin, you know Karin, Donal,
yes.
She always said to me, her father was a very humble man. He didn't want a lot of promotion. He didn't want a lot of, praise. He didn't want a lot of coverage, nothing. He said he did what he did because it was the right thing to do at the time. And he felt he had to do it. And that's all he ever wanted in his life. He never wanted publicity or anything like that at all. But you have to say something. You've got to say something about this man. We cannot be silent about this man, because what can I tell you? He actually, he was a hero. He was a hero. Never looked upon himself as a hero, but he was a hero. And to this day, the badge on the caps and the berets of the tank corps is actually, if you look closely, that Cromwell tank, not the up-to-date, all the great but that original, that became the emblem of the IDF tank corps, that Cromwell tank.
Absolutely. And Karin was telling me that he would never talk about it. He would never talk about his exploits. He would be very, very quiet, humble man.
Right.
And Donal, tell me the path that that Mike Flanagan's life took after the delivery of that tank. What path did his life take after that?
Well, he stayed with the IDF, really. He was in the War of Independence. He was active in the 56 campaign, in the 67 war, and in the 73 war. He lived in the kibbutzes. He was the ultimate mechanic, the ultimate handyman, the ultimate friend to everybody. He was the most helpful and generous man with his time and with his skills. He eventually, after his wife died, and he was predeceased also by a son of his, he went to Canada, where he, as you said, Malcolm, he married Moore Schwartz's widow.
That's right, his widow. Yes, yeah. He was both together in 48. Yes. Ironic.
Yeah. He died in 2014 and was brought back by Israel to have a funeral in his first wife's grave.
He wrote down, I want to be buried in the land of Israel, in the soil of Israel, next to my first wife, Ruth Bevy. Of course, they did that, of course.
Yeah.
That's where he lies to this day. And we tried to have every year, although the last year or two it didn't quite work out with the wars and the other wars, and then the COVID before that. But we must reintroduce that, having an annual memorial for Mike Flanagan, or Michael Pella, that's written on his tombstone.
I certainly would like to attend that sometime.
Well, that could be an idea. I must find out when the actual is, and then maybe you might come over, and then we'll give you a night to present your book here, and why not? You understand?
Well, that'd be wonderful, yeah.
As you say, when you stick with me, kid, you'll get far. Believe me, you won't have a book left. You won't have a book left to go home with.
You caught me in, Malcolm.
Exactly.
Marco, have you anything to add there and what you're hearing?
It is very moving, and I think both Malcolm and I have a sort of a goal to set relations right between the country of our birth and the country of our ancestors. I think this is something dear to us, and I think this type of raising awareness about the commonalities between Irish and Jewish history will help people to foster a better understanding and see the great affinities between two ancient nations.
Now, speaking of improving relations between Ireland and Israel, Donal, we've seen many situations down through the years where Irish people gave of themselves to various countries in different forms. They provided pure feats in many countries, and were recognised in Ireland for that. But to date, Mike Flanagan has not been recognised in Ireland.
It's unfortunate, yeah. To put it mildly, we're very, very bad in Ireland at recognising military heroes, and you'll have seen that through the Congo, and various other examples where people just were ignored. And I never saw a mention of Mike Flanagan in the Irish press, and just people didn't know about him. There was an awareness in Foxford, in the Foxford area, but nobody knew that much about it. Trying to raise awareness at this particular point in time, in the dreadful situations we're living in, with the awful propaganda that has soaked Ireland and perverted Ireland, is a challenge. I just don't know. The time is very, very difficult in Ireland. It's embarrassing. It's unfortunate. It's wrong, and it couldn't be more wrong. And our politicians, I'm afraid, have closed ears, and we've been so brainwashed. Like RTE is like a cross between Al Jazeera and Pravda, and anybody who speaks the truth here is either ignored or not published. And you see from the so-called Irish Times and RTE and the media in general, they just talk to the hand. They don't want to know. And people like the two gentlemen, the names are escaping now, the former defense minister, who's a Jewish man in Dublin.
Alan Shatter.
Yeah. And the gentleman whose name unfortunately escapes me this time, do their best, but people don't want to hear. There's a narrative. It's embedded every day. It's reinforced every day by the state media, and it's just a difficult time to wave a flag from Mike Flanagan, unfortunately. But hopefully things will change.
Yeah, can I just add something? Can I just add something to that, Eugene? In fact, when the announcement came that they were closing up the Israel embassy in Dublin, As you mentioned before on my listing of activities, I'm a member of the Likud Central Committee, and I very close to then the foreign minister is Israel Katz. He's now the defense minister. And I was absolutely, I was quoted on this, it was even in the Jerusalem Post, Chairman was that against closing of the embassy entirely. Actually, they forgot to put in. Yes, there should have been some move to maybe downgrade to show their absolute whatever, the Irish attitude and policies against Israel, sometimes obsessive as at times. But they shouldn't have actually closed it. Should have maybe downgraded, maybe a sort of a Israel consulate or something, but not to pull out entirely out of there. It's caused a void. Quite a void. The Jewish community there feel they feel that void very, very much. But besides that, a lot of countries have embassies in other countries, and they're absolutely diverse to one another and their policies, etc., etc. And yet they don't pull up, they don't close up. Yes, some action should have been taken. Downgraded, no problem. Have a chargé d'affaires, have a consul general there instead of it not entirely to pull out. Because I do believe by being on the ground there, you can fight the fight much better than you pull up stake, pull out, and not have any representation there at all. I mean, the Irish embassy is still here in Israel, thriving, active, etc., etc. And yet, ironically, Israel now does not have in Dublin. And I, for one, since I came to Israel in 1980, I joined in this campaign to push. We had recognition from 1976. We had like a formal diplomatic ambassador. The Irish was in Greece in Athens, and the Israel ambassador, well, it was either maybe in Brussels or London or something like that. And we got it in 1996. My dear good friend and mentor, and Zvi Gabay became the first resident Israel ambassador. It was a proud moment. We were all proud at that particular moment. And of course, they opened up the Irish embassy here. So it was a lot of work, a lot of pushing, a lot of lobbying went into that. So I was most saddened when the Israel embassy was closed.
Marco, how do we square that circle in the sense that the Irish embassy in Israel is very active? I know you've been at a number of gigs on at the invitation of the ambassador there, and it works well there. And next thing, as Malcolm says, we no longer have an Israeli embassy, an embassy that the current Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was if I'm correct, opened that embassy in Ireland at the time, or I believe
he visited Ireland just a few months later. He visited there just to officially cut the ribbon again, as they say.
Okay, Marco.
Well, actually, on the diplomatic front, Malcolm is much more au fait with things, so I defer to Malcolm on these matters.
Let me put it this way to you. You mentioned before, quite rightly, Eugene, about very, very. I haven't known it since I came to Israel. This diplomatic rift, this diplomatic, political, should I say, rift between Israel and Ireland, and yet with all of that, I believe in still keeping engaged. I have a good relationship with the Irish ambassador, the rest of the embassy. We mightn't all be on the one channel, on the one track as far as the difference between Israel and Ireland, but we speak openly together. We exchange our thoughts and our where we're coming from here in Israel, etc., etc. And at times I've even tried to avert people going and demonstrating outside the embassy, etc., etc. I mentioned many times that if you want to go and demonstrate, organize a group, go over to Dublin, stand outside Leinster House and lobby the minister, the Taoiseach or the Taoiseach or whatever, go over there. So these people sitting here in the embassy are diplomats. They're representing Ireland. They're representing are adhering to the policies, but they're diplomats. They're not politicians. You got to get to the politicians. That's where you got to get to. And we have this, as I said, open engagement, etc., etc. We meet up quite often, casually, even socially, but it's important to keep the lines of communication. I mean, I'm the sort of people very close to me, members of our own Israel Ireland friendship, say, no more, finish. What is this friendship? There's no friendship. And yet, yes, the friendship is really on a thin line of just boom, snapping, and that's it. But I do believe to keep the line openly engage, openly discuss, even to agree to disagree, but never to cut off the channels of communication between us.
No, absolutely. But just to give you some insights, even just from the last week here in Ireland. Last week we discussed the pre-legislative scrutiny of the Israeli settlements in the occupied Palestinian territory, prohibition of importation of goods. A couple of things happened at that. One is that people were invited to make submissions to the group. The Ireland-Israel Alliance, nor the Jewish JRC, the Jewish Representative Council of Ireland, were not invited. They had to apply to come to the Foreign Affairs and Trade Committee. That's one thing. The second thing is, and I won't name the person, but a very eminent, what do you call him? Financial guy here in Ireland, financial commentator here in Ireland, Gavin was invited, and when they saw his submission, he was uninvited because his submission was utterly against this bill that's been scrutinized, or is now finished being scrutinized in the Oireachtas. These, and then if you talk about, and Donal mentioned it earlier on about the politicians in Ireland here, Malcolm, you would swear that every single politician in Leinster House was anti-Israel, but they're not. But they're afraid. They're too afraid to come out and go against this narrative, this cancer of an attitude, and they're afraid to go against that, and that is what people are dealing with here. That's the uphill climb for people in Ireland here, is what they're dealing with. They're only just a couple of examples.
You're quite right, what you just mentioned, Eugene. There are many sitting in the Dáil who are actually would never in their life privately would say they're anti-Israel or support any anti-Israel measures. But as you're saying, the climate actually today is that they're actually not speaking out. They're not openly coming out and sort of coming out with their even slightly pro-Israel attitude, or even objective attitudes, whatever. And I think this is reflective of the actual situation in Ireland today, and across Europe, by the way, about the Muslim communities. I mean, you look in France. France now is on the path also to recognize the state of Palestine. As the United States, Mike Huckabee, the new ambassador appointed by Trump, said the other night that nobody's mentioning where the state is being. He said maybe Macron wants to put them into the side of France and call it the Frankenstein, whatever, on the Riviera. Something, as Italy's Prime Minister Meloni came out and she said, okay, everybody's talking about Palestine, but you cannot recognize something which hasn't been established. First of all, let's work towards, with Israel, with our other partners, whatever, about how that could come about. And then when you establish something, then you recognize us. So I think it's putting the horse before the cart a little, and much perhaps, in that particular aspect. And that is something we talk openly about. absolutely amongst ourselves about this. But as you say, Eugene, what can I tell you? It's the politicians, and they're pushing all the time forward with these policies. But at the end of the day, I think the economics will work out here. The economical fallout from all of this, especially with Trump being the president, and you can understand why that is. Very much so.
And Donal, just in relation to Mike Flanagan and Foxford and Mayo, is there any family left there is there any scintilla of family left there of Mike Flanagan there?
We haven't managed to make contact with anybody who's related. There is a Flanigan family, but there's no connection whatsoever. But in fact, what I've recently discovered is that perhaps that Mike Flanagan adopted the Mike Flanagan name after the Cromwell tank incident, and he may have another name that is the original. And I'm trying to trace that at the moment. So he certainly covered his tracks well.
The plot thickens. The plot thickens.
Yes,
no pun intended. No pun intended. Covered his tracks.
I just say something, address something to Donal there for a minute. And later the British put a thing on his head. He couldn't. It was very, very, for many, many years he didn't leave Israel, and he never went to any country, British connected, British Commonwealth, British, I don't know, whatever, because actually they still had a warrant out for him many, many years after all. They were incensed, the British. They wanted to grab him, take him, put him up for treason against the crown, So he was very careful to cover tracks all those years. Very much so.
This is very interesting now, isn't it? This is getting very interesting now, because so you have some belief, Donal, that he may have changed his name because he may have been arrested by the British. Is that partly what you're thinking?
Possibly. This is very recent information, and it probably was, as you say, covering his tracks. He didn't want to be found out. And interestingly, you mentioned the British attitude. I sent a copy of the book and a letter explaining what the story was to his regimental headquarters, and say, listen, this is the story. Can we have any evidence from your side, or any story from your side as I have yet to get an answer or a reply or acknowledgement.
Can I just back up what you're saying, Eugene? Even to this day, when it comes to any fight against the Brits, especially here during their mandate years, they're still holding it as, for instance, I always go every year to the commemoration of the blowing up of the King David Hotel by Menachem Begin's organization at the time.
1946. In 1946.
Yes, and there was a plaque up there, and they changed it recently. And they said this King David, which was the headquarters, the half of it, the right wing of it, was the headquarters of the British administration in the Secretariat, you name it, the government of the British Mandate. And this is actually, they blew it up, gave them a warning, 20 minutes. They didn't want to take it. They turned around, the commanding officer, we don't take orders from Jews. And it was absolutely ignored. But to this day, when there's a commemoration of this, the Brits take umbrage about it, about the plaque saying this was put up by the freedom fighters of Israel. They still hold this umbrage against using this terminology of the freedom fighters of Israel, So there you are. But actually, when he went to live in Canada, may I add, Donal, Canada was a member of the British Commonwealth, but it still is. I think just the Commonwealth. They dropped the British side of it, but already the statute of limitations had run out by that time, from what I understood. So he couldn't have been extradited from Canada to Britain or anything like that. It was very, well thought out, and I think the statute of limitations were gone, were over by that particular stage, and he'd be more freer, open, whatever, that sort of thing. But can I mention something? Why not build something, a monument to him in Oxford?
Well, my first thought on that was, where would I get a Cromwell tank? I believe.
Well,
we could build a mock-up. We could build a mock-up.
The Cromwell tank. I don't know what the Cromwell tank. Then because the word Cromwell mightn't go down well in Mayo. Because Oliver Cromwell, when he said to hell or to Connacht, right?
Well, I did a bit of digging to find a Cromwell tank, but apparently they just don't exist. They were used on anti-tank ranges forever, and they're just gone.
Yes.
Ovington maybe, or Latroon.
We might have to get a 3D printer to print one.
Yes.
But seriously, Donal, I extend to you an invitation to come out here, and I will. My person has organized an event here, and I would have very, very wide range interest here, and maybe in the future down the road, we might even go into a Hebrew version of the book. What about that, Donal?
Well, now you're the second person who said that to me, because I was speaking to Mike Moss on the phone recently, and he said that he would do that, but I haven't heard from him ever since. But that would be of immense pleasure to me.
Really, because we like heroes in Israel. We love heroes.
Yes,
absolutely.
And one of the things that we do, one of the things that we're doing with the likes of this webinar is obviously giving the other side, telling the other side, and trying to make progress in some of the topics that we cover. And that is a really interesting invitation there to you, Donal, that Malcolm could find out when an annual commemoration of Sergeant Mike Flanagan, or whatever his name was.
Michael Peleg. There was a few versions of that Hebrew name used when he went to Broadway.
For you to go out and present your book to an audience out there, and there's I have no doubt in my mind that Malcolm is absolutely correct. You would not be coming back with any books. No doubt in my mind that.
Can I just mention something else, Eugene, and Donal as well? Also, a part of my CV, I'm an associate of the Friends of the National Library of Israel, and I will specifically, if you come, I hope you will, we'll present one of your books to the National Library of Israel. We already have a certain corner there, Irish affiliated corner there, of the genealogical history of the Jews of Ireland, and I think this would be a great addition to the National Library of Israel.
Yeah,
we've got another event to attend to there as well. And it's not far away from the Dublin Pub in Jerusalem, so we can always wet our lips down there, Donal.
I'll throw a small grenade in here. Malcolm mentioned earlier, and he's right, is about getting the politicians on board. If it was possible for Donal to go and bring a politician with him.
I'm feeling ill.
I'm not saying.
Now we're getting into more diplomatic waters. But
I know it's a long shot.
You did decide to come. Sorry.
A long shot, Donal, I'm sure, but
no. But actually, you know what, Eugene? You know what? You're not.
He's on to something. He's on to something.
Because if I knew you would come, whatever, I would try to liaison with our ambassador here and the embassy here, and see if, whilst you're here, simultaneously we could have. I don't want to say too much at the moment. Let's put it that way. You understand? Okay. But all I can say, if we get this up and running, the sky is the limit.
Absolutely.
Right. Let me interject. We also have a wonderful tank museum at Latroon, Malcolm.
Absolutely, I mentioned that before.
Yeah, and that's where there could also.
Well, this may be a good venue to have the event of the presentation of your book, Donal. It could be excellent area place, and already I can get the place, ready for you, etc., etc. No, really.
Yeah.
But if we can paint this with this memorial for him, like the memorial, I'm just trying to. I think January, February of 26 is the next memorial of his passing. So we could sort of intertwine it with that. And I think that would be good. Absolutely. There's no question about it.
That sounds amazing.
If we had dipped a snip all together of this Ireland, Israel, and we mentioned before all of the politics and whatever, something that we can all unite around, and support.
Does Mike still have any family in Israel or in Canada?
Canada, I don't know. Israel, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I just mentioned to Donal earlier on. In fact, it's funny. We keep in contact, and it was just like mental telepathy. I said, "Hello." I said, "Kareem, oh my God!" I said to her, "You know what's happening tonight?" I said to her, and I mentioned Donal, and I mentioned Eugene, and Marco, whatever. And I said, "We're only whatever." And she said, "Yes." She really had a copy of the book, and she was really happy and pleased about the book. And she, of course, would be part of any type of event, etc., etc. Of course, and glad there was one. She was always there representing the family. In fact, her son was sort of a bit of an amateur brewer of beer, and he brewed beer especially in memory of his grandfather and called it 48.
Wow.
Beer 48. In memory of his, I think the back of the bottle mentions something about the grandfather, everything like that, and so there we are, food for thought, and that invitation is very welcome and very open to you, and let's see what we can get working on.
Count me in.
Thank you.
I don't need an excuse to go to Israel, but an excuse is wonderful.
To me, so I can pre-publicize it amongst our own people, whet their appetites. Let's put it that way. Okay.
Yes.
Right.
Wonderful.
Just to go back for the last, we're probably in the last 8 minutes of the webinar. Just go back to the relationship with Ireland and Israel back in after the British Mandate. There was an Ireland and an Israel that understood each other. Isn't that correct, Marco?
I believe there were sensibilities that one could identify with the other. Certainly during the period of the British Mandate, when the underground was at work, they were inspired by the Irish struggle for independence. So much so that Yitzhak Shamir took on the nom de guerre of Michael after Michael Collins. And there are also many parallel instances. The rising of 1916, the prisoners that were executed. We had a similar situation as well here. Jewish prisoners of the Jewish resistance being executed. Then, of course, we have the involvement of another famous Irishman, Colonel Patterson, and I think, Donal, you'll certainly be aware of him, and perhaps that's worthy of another podcast.
Yes.
And we can
well, actually, for him, we actually many years ago, his remains were brought here to Israel.
That's right.
And they were reinterred just in a moshav just outside Netanya.
That's right.
You mentioned Netanyahu before, actually.
That's right.
His name is John Patterson, and Benjamin Netanyahu's brother, who fell in the Entebbe the attack to release the hostages at the time. They called him after him Jonathan, which is Jonathan.
That's right.
And they're very well connected. His father, who was an historian, Netanyahu's father, he had connections with John Patterson, who founded the first Jewish
Mule Corps.
The Mule Corps. Yeah, the Zion Mule Corps back in the First World War, in fact. And Jabotinsky was the head of the revisionist Zionists, who evolved into the Irgun, who evolved into the Herut, who evolved in the present-day Likud party here, was actually a second in command. And mentioning Jabotinsky, actually visited Dublin in the mid-30s.
That's
and he met De Valera. And De Valera was very, very taken up with him and the struggle for independence, especially on the front against the British side, of course. But something else actually took De Valera's interest. He heard the word partition. Don't forget, this was coming up to the late 30s, the first Peel Commission, etc., about the thoughts of partitioning. And De Valera was absolutely so thing about partition. That's what really got him involved. And of course, he had Bobby Briscoe was one of his reporters and confidants, who became the first Jewish mayor of Dublin later on. He actually was involved. And people say, did he get the go-ahead from De Valera? Did he support De Valera? But never mind the official side. But actually, he organized a certain ship at a certain time, which included certain, I can't go into the full details of it, but it helped very much the cause against the British. And then later on, War of Independence here in Israel. So
yes, picking up on partition, Ireland.
A lot of waters under the bridge since then.
Picking up on the partition, Ireland had one partition. Israel had many partitions. That was Israel was the nation state of Israel was whittled down continuously under the British.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, they're only getting 43%, and the Arab state was getting, I think, nearly over 60%, quarters of the country nearly.
Yes. So it wasn't really a partition; it was a continuous slicing up until basically nothing viable would have remained.
Not particularly. That's why when you think back, you say to yourself, "Wow, why in the hell did the Arabs not go for it? Go for their state in Palestine in those days?" But of course, they were more against a Jewish state being established as they were for their own state to be established. So I guess this is a lot of people don't know that to this day. As you mentioned earlier on, Eugene, they're fed up with all sorts of other what can I tell you, information. But sometimes you have to go back in history to learn the present history for future history.
And it's worth repeating. It's worth repeating.
Absolutely, worth repeating. And it's funny.
What Marco said earlier, the Arabs at that time were offered a state 45% bigger.
Yes.
Than
pre-1967
border. The pre-67 Israel.
Yes.
And
that's
they were offered.
It was a 60-40 ratio in favor of the Arabs, of course. So, but also through the years, the Arabs never miss an opportunity for establishing over the years a state. Which, of course, in 1948, the Jordanians, we mentioned the Jordanians before, they took over, they called it the East Bank. People call it the West Bank, depends which side of the River Jordan you're standing on. And they took that over, absolutely never handed it over to their Palestinians or whatever to create a state, but they integrated it into their own. And Transjordan became Jordan, that we have today. However, Donal, a lot of water under the bridge since then.
Can I ask you, Donal, just in relation to the press and the coverage of your book, how did the press in Mayo take to the promotion of you writing this book?
Yeah, the local Mayo News, I gave him a copy, and a guy called John Healy was very supportive. He wrote a glowing report on this magnificent piece of history from Foxford, and it was very, very, very positive. But there was a deafening silence following that. I didn't see any comment, hear any comment. There was just.
And do people in Foxford mention
it? I really haven't got. I had a sort of a semi-launch there, and a small number of people turned up. I sold 13 books, I think, and
pretty good.
That was about it. There was a guy who went through Foxford all right recently, and he said he started asking about it, and went into a bar and said, "Does anybody know?" And, "Oh yes, I know some guy, and some guy has written a book," and that was about it. But most of the people just didn't know. Just no publicity.
Can I?
Go ahead,
Eugene, is there any, can I just ask Donal a question? Did you present the book to any of the national papers to do a review or something on it?
No. Must get around to doing that.
I see. No, I thought you might venture into it. I mean, nothing ventured, nothing gained, as they say. But you mentioned before about the Irish Times.
Perhaps it could be serialized in on Foblach.
Yeah.
How about that, Donal? How about that, Donal? You weren't expecting that.
Yes.
You are
maybe, you don't know. Yeah. And I thought maybe Irish Independent, Irish, I don't know, whatever that you have there at the moment. I was going to say the Irish Press, but that's long gone. Yeah,
the rare old times.
The rare old times.
Do you remember the evening press? Do you remember the evening press with the purple thing on the evening press?
That was Zed's favorite paper, saying he owned the bloody thing,
Yes.
Whatever.
The evening.
But I can just mention on a personal note, my first bit of publicity was my photo on the front of the Irish Press in 1958. I was 8 years of age, giving my age away, in the hands of Joe Briscoe, the son of Bobby Briscoe, after I was out with my father and a few friends. They had this motor launch, which blew up about 4 or 5 miles outside O'Leary Harbour. And the next morning, there's a picture of Joe and myself there holding up my arms there, whatever. Of course, the connection and his father and Fianna Fáil and Deb, of course, they came out, and I still have that actually that summer. That was my first bit of publicity, and many more since then as well, but without blowing up anywhere or being in any blow-ups or whatever like that. Anyway,
Donal, the final word from you when you see the uphill battle that we have in Ireland. Do you think that good will triumph evil eventually?
I have no doubt about it. People are waking up, but I tell you, the one thing that will wake up is the realization that when you curse Israel, you are cursed, and when you bless Israel, you are blessed. And we will pay a price for the cursing we have been doing to Israel over the last number of years. And I think that our economy now, thanks to, I'm not blaming him, I'm just admiring him, thanks to Donald Trump's measures, he will, and the Israeli Prime Minister as well, that they take a pretty dim view of what Ireland has done, the first country in Europe to try and ban the sales of Jewish goods since Nazi Germany. And we'll pay a price for that. And that will maybe bring us to our senses. Things will turn around. But I do believe things will turn around. Right will triumph over wrong.
Marco?
I cannot but echo Donal's words. I believe the good people of Ireland will come to their senses, and I think we should end with Erin Gobra and Am Israel Chai. We should celebrate two ancient civilizations. And
yes, as I mentioned before, wind up as well. We have to keep the lines of communication open. We have to keep engaged. It might seem hard, it might seem maybe wow. We're not going to get anywhere with this, but we've got to keep it flying. We've got to keep engaged. We've got to, whoever we can get. We still have friends on the ground there, Donal, and I'm sure you'll agree with that. Maybe if you thin on the ground, it might be openly supportive, but we've got to keep engaged. We've got to keep open. We've got to keep the dialogue open. And I do believe, I don't know how long it's going to take, but I do believe that there will come a time that maybe other forces in Europe will cause the various governments and political echelon to come to their senses and realize that the fight against evil, the fight against fundamentalism of any religion, Islam, whatever, is a fight we have to unite with, or unite for it not to dominate either the Christian cultural way of life of Europe and, of course, our own way of life here. Now, that's not saying anything about the people who are Muslim or Arab, whatever. We all want to live at peace here in this region. We have to live in peace in this region. Nobody is against peace here, and nobody is for against war. And the wars that are set upon us and put upon us, well, we've got to defend ourselves on that. This is not 1939, and this is not 1942-43. Israel protects itself, defends itself, and we have to continue on doing this, simultaneously looking always for an avenue where we can speak to people who are not fundamentalistic, who are not terroristic, who want to live in peace. And there are, by the way, they have more their hands in their pockets than their hands on the hearts of getting involved in terrorist activities or destruction, or what we saw on October 7th in 23, which my son, who was a hardened officer, reserve officer in intelligence, field intelligence, in all the wars he ever fought in, he came and he absolutely could not even relate to the absolutely murderous, cutting, raping, you name it, burning bodies of innocent kids, babies, mothers. Absolutely beyond his that he ever knew from all the wars that he ever went through. So hopefully with all of this, something will emerge eventually. Something has to emerge eventually. And I believe we have to keep pushing for that, defending ourselves, of course, as well as going and looking for those opportunities. And for those people who do not wish us ill, who do not wish to destroy us, but who wish to live in peace, and they themselves give a better life to their own people, their own children, for future generations.
Yeah. Okay, that brings us to the end of this evening's broadcast. I just want to say a couple of things. I want to say that one of the outcomes we have of this podcast is that Donal has been invited to Israel to present his book in a commemoration day for Sergeant Mike Flanagan in Israel.
Right.
And all these small things are little small things, but they mean a lot in improving relations between between Israel and Ireland. And Mike Flanagan obviously was a hero in Israel to have what he did to help Israel get that armory that it needed, that it would go on to need to defend itself. Now, I told you I put the link for this book, Sergeant Flanigan, Foxford and Israel, by Donal Buckley. The link is in there. I think it's €17.50 for a copy if you want to buy it. You can just click on that link and you can actually buy the book there. I want to thank Donal for doing the research into this, for writing a fine book, and hopefully the webinars that we do here will go on to improve relations between Ireland and Israel. I want to thank you, Donal, for your time. I want to thank you, Malcolm, as well, for your
You're
time.
Welcome, Eugene. I look forward to participating in any future podcast with you too.
I appreciate it, and you can be assured I'll be coming knocking on your door. There's no doubt about that.
Oh, wow! You better be quick. I suppose very quickly. Yeah, go on.
I want to thank Marco as well.
I just mentioned, have you got a pen in your hand, Donal?
Sorry, I missed that, Malcolm.
You got a pen in your hand? A pen. Okay, maybe you can pass on my number.
We can do that offline. We can
Don't worry about that.
Fine. I thought you right hand my number.
Just want to thank people for tuning in, for listening.
No problem.
As I said, if you can still drop a comment in the chat box if you want to. At any time, you can still subscribe and for more insights. And you can, and I'd appreciate if you could do all three of those, is like and share, because that's how we get the numbers up in the podcast. So thank you to my guests. Thank you all for.
Thank you, Eugene. Thank you for having me tonight.
And that brings us to the end.
Great sharing with Donal. Great sharing. Done great sharing with Marco. We still have to raise those Guinnesses in the Dublin pub in Jerusalem, but very soon, Marco.
It shall be done.
Okay.
Absolutely. Raise up the spirits with the spirits.
Thank you. Okay.
It's been a pleasure, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Thank
Big
you, Donal.
Buddha.
Thank you.
Thank you, Donal. Right.